You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. I'm heading a little off the beaten path this week to chat about the Asciidoc markup language and how powerful and useful it can be for developers and technical writing. I also really love to read, and I find productivity topics fascinating, especially when those are related to developers and coding. Today, I'll mention just two that I'm currently reading and give some highlights that I have so far. To start us off, I wanted to talk a little bit about Asciidoc for content writing, documentation, and basically just any type of technical writing. First off, if you haven't come across Asciidoc before, it is a plain text markup language for writing technical content. So it is designed to be for technical writing. It's packed with a lot of really helpful semantic elements and has some features to modularize and reuse the content. For instance, you can include pieces of other documentation, you can link and incorporate a lot of your technical content together very easily. You can write Asciidoc using a text editor. Lots of different text editors will support Asciidoc as a extension or type. And then you can also manage them in a version control system. I utilize mine inside GitHub a lot, but the other things will work as well. And then you can publish to a lot of different output formats. The most popular one probably being Asciidoc to HTML. I personally use Asciidoc for everything, whether that's writing blog posts, documenting my tech demos or tech processes that I have to do, even administrative technical processes like signing in or setting up certain authentication or certain systems and environments. So I use it a lot for that. I also use it to outline my conference abstracts. So various conferences that I might submit to give technical talks, I will write my abstracts in Asciidoc. Now, I never really used it until a few years ago when I joined Neo4j, and I have really come to find it is super useful. There's very little syntax learning curve to it, although you can build some pretty fancy custom macros. I've seen several of them. I've played around with some of the maybe mid-level capabilities that Asciidoc provides, but nothing really too fancy. I really just haven't needed it, but I have seen some very nice, very smooth, clean, classy looking stuff produced with Asciidoc. It is very similar to Markdown. So if you're familiar with Markdown, it's not much of a switch, but Asciidoc does provide more extensions for technical writing. There's a comparison on their website between Asciidoc and several other Markdown languages, like traditional Markdown and so on. So if you want to look at that, it'll show you the differences there. You can still generate HTML from Asciidoc, and there are tons of libraries and integrations for various things that you might want to do with it. I pulled in one time a library that all it did was convert Asciidoc to markup or to HTML or to something or other. There's lots of things you can do with it and lots of integrations and libraries you can play and tweak some different things. Most editors will read Asciidoc. A lot of your just plain text editors. I use VS Code a lot when I write Asciidoc, but I've written it in IntelliJ. I've written it in plain text editors, Atom, and a few other things that I use. But those that don't take Asciidoc, it's very few minor adjustments to Markdown or other similar languages that you can remove a couple of the Asciidoc characters, maybe fix the link format or something, and you're off to the races. There aren't too many changes if you're going from Asciidoc to something else. Neo4j also uses it almost company-wide for things like documentation, online course content, and then GitHub will render the Asciidoc format. So we use it a lot for project READMEs on GitHub. I use it exclusively on my personal GitHub for my README files as well. You'll see all of my READMEs being a .adoc format. And then also Hugo Static Site Generator will read it. Various themes there takes Asciidoc and then we'll convert it to HTML for you. And a lot of blogging sites will also take Asciidoc as a content format for publishing. So if I write Asciidoc locally on a text editor and then I copy paste it into a blog site, or I push it up to GitHub to render my Hugo personal website, all of that works. It's very transferable and easy to push various places. So if you don't know Asciidoc, I do recommend at least taking a look, especially if you write any sort of technical content at all. And even if you don't use it in your day-to-day work, it's still a nice skill to have and is pretty useful for just general note-taking and your own process documents. The couple of books that I wanted to look at today are called Atomic Habits by James Clear and Deep Work by Cal Newport. I'm not through these just yet. I'm only part of the way through for each of them, but I wanted to talk about just a couple of highlights. You'll see these two books recommended a lot across productivity, blog posts, or top reads, or things you might see out there. But Atomic Habits by James Clear talks about how do you make large changes with small incremental steps. So whatever your goal might be, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, whether that is to produce some piece of content or to write a particular feature or to build a specific product or even lose 10 pounds, change your eating habits, etc., you do it in very small increments. And instead of focusing on that high level goal of, I want to release this product, say we want to work on this project for an hour each day, or let's produce something small, incremental every day for 1 month. Instead of focusing on those high in the sky goals, implement consistent habits that will produce that goal over time. Those big lofty goals, I'll get to that in the future. It's easy to procrastinate that. What can I do today that can put me on the path to achieving whatever goal it is I would like to achieve? Focus on what small thing can I implement today that is going to put me on a path to get there. The next book is called Deep Work by Cal Newport. I'm listening to it in an audiobook format, and I actually think my time just ran out on it, so I'll have to request it again to finish it up. But it talks about long blocks of uninterrupted time can produce greater output that's of higher value. I've heard this termed before and really liked the terminology of legato work versus staccato work. If you're familiar with music, these terms will seem familiar, but longer stretches of uninterrupted time being legato, which in music is a long, smoother type of phrase, versus staccato being very short, brief segments. It's a very chopped up, short set of notes. Applying this to your work, I really like this method of looking at it that way. The book talks about examples of professors and inventors and writers, authors, novelists who produce great work because they're able to spend long, uninterrupted blocks of time. The book talks a little bit about how craftsmen unplug from other things to focus on their craft and what they're building. In the example, it's to produce a sword. We don't really think anything of it when we can't reach a craftsman. They unplug from other things in order to refine their craft. But it's a little bit different in the knowledge worker realm. They're often synonymous with constant digital presence. It's interesting to see how we don't apply the same rules depending on the type of craftsman that you are, whether that's technology or whether that's building something physical. We can't always be unreachable. Many of us are not in situations where we can do that. And the book talks about that as well. And you have to balance between what's personally achievable and what you feel comfortable with and what are the expectations of your job or your lifestyle. But maybe we can block longer stretches or certain days or time windows to go deep and really accomplish big things. This is also a little bit different when you look at office work and remote work. Those dynamics will impact your schedule and what you're able to do. But looking at your job role and how that differs and how you can strike that balance. For instance, the author gives the example that maybe a manager can't unplug for days at a time or even several hour blocks at a time, but possibly they could unplug once a week for an hour block here, or something that's more manageable to them to really accomplish and focus on challenges that might be cropping up in their day-to-day work. The thing that I really like about both of these reads is that they challenge routine practices. So instead of going through the motions or handling the traditional daily grind as it comes, we can rethink why we do certain things and if we could possibly make improvements to optimize our daily work and our daily habits. I talked about the Asciidoc markup language and how I use it for code and technical content. I also highlighted 2 productivity books that I'm currently reading and discussed some of the topics covered in them so far. Thanks for listening and happy coding.